being alone can be better for your soul than any relationship. I know, that might sound a bit extreme, even uncomfortable, especially if you grew up believing that love is salvation, that loneliness is failure, and that healing comes from someone else. But Carl Jung knew, some wounds can only be healed in silence. Some strengths only emerge when no one is watching, and some versions of you only awaken when you stop chasing company at any cost. In this video, you're going to understand why living alone, consciously, can be the key to your deepest transformation. And when it's over, you won't be begging for connection anymore. You'll become it. So stay with me until the end, because I'm going to show you how to turn your solitude into a place of power, even if it still hurts right now. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, now's the time. Here we talk about consciousness, transformation, and real psychology. The way life really happens. No filters, no cliches. From early on, we're shaped to believe that being alone is a sign of failure. A quiet, introspective child is seen as a problem. A single adult as someone incomplete. Silence around us is quickly filled with distractions, noise, voices, all so no one has to face what happens when the outside world goes quiet. Carl Jung said that for a human being to become whole, they must dive within. But our culture taught us the opposite. We've been programmed to seek identity in the eyes of others. To build a persona, that social mask that pleases, adapts, and avoids rejection, as if it were our true self. Over time, we confuse connection with dependency. And the more we reinforce that pattern, the more dangerous it feels to be alone. But what really hurts isn't the present. The pain that surfaces in solitude comes from the past. Old emotional imprints, unhealed rejections, misunderstood abandonments, resurface when there's no one left to perform for. It's the wounded ego that panics in the emptiness. Because it's the ego that depends on responses, validation, on someone else's presence to feel like it exists. The soul isn't afraid of silence. But the ego is, and with good reason. It was conditioned to survive through external acceptance. For the ego, being alone is a risk. For the soul, it's a calling. Jung knew that there are moments when retreat is necessary, not as an escape, but as a rite of passage. When we find ourselves alone, without distractions, what arises isn't emptiness. It's the unconscious content that was repressed. And that's where the real work begins. Being alone is uncomfortable, because it forces us to feel, and feeling, when we're used to just reacting, is deeply challenging. But it's in that discomfort that the individuation process begins. When you stop running from silence and start listening to it, what arises isn't weakness, it's clarity. You're not being punished for being alone. You're being invited to reconnect with yourself, and maybe for the first time, without intermediaries. When this reconnection begins, it doesn't come with euphoria. It comes with silence, and often with a void that seems to promise nothing. But it's in that void that the soul starts to breathe again. Carl Jung called individuation the process of becoming who you truly are. Not what others projected onto you, not what society expects, but what exists within you when all the masks fall away. And that journey doesn't begin in the middle of noise. It begins when you choose to retreat, when instead of distracting yourself, you choose to look inward. Voluntary withdrawal isn't an escape, it's courage. It's you telling the unconscious, I'm ready to see what I've avoided seeing. It's when the character steps aside for the person, when the stage falls apart, and you start to recognize the actor behind it all. Society trained us to associate stillness with loss, solitude with weakness. But in Jung's view, it's precisely in the pause that the self, the true center of the psyche, begins to reveal itself. And this process doesn't happen loudly. It's subtle, silent, almost imperceptible at first, but deeply transformative. When the external noise fades, you start hearing your soul for the first time, and it doesn't scream, it whispers. It reveals memories, intuitions, sensations that were buried under the weight of haste, distractions, and the need to please. It's natural that at this moment, a strange feeling arises. A discomfort of not knowing exactly who you are without the routine, the roles, the relationships. But that's the very proof that the right path has begun. The true self isn't a ready-made idea. It's something that reveals itself slowly when there's inner space for it to emerge. This is the journey, not a straight line, but a deep dive. A process where you don't add, but remove. Where you don't seek something outside, but return to something essential within. And that's only possible when you consciously choose to step out of the world and into yourself. Solitude here stops being absence, it becomes presence. And such an intense presence that, for the first time, you begin to notice what was always within you but never had the space to emerge. It's in this space of presence that something subtle, and at the same time profound, starts to happen. What once seemed so solid in you begins to show cracks. And it's not destruction, it's revelation. In Jungian psychology, we call persona the mask we wear to be accepted in the world. It's the role we play, the nice one, the strong one, the charismatic, the fun, the efficient. The persona isn't fake, but it is limited. It's built to fit in, to protect, to belong. But there comes a moment when it no longer fits. And that moment almost always happens in silence. Because while we're surrounded by people, tasks, expectations, the persona works like a shield. But when everything goes quiet, when no one's watching, it stops making sense. You start to realize that so many things you used to do, feel, or say were automatic responses. Emotional addictions, learned reactions, the performance of acceptance. And when that theater falls apart, it can be terrifying. Because what's left is just you. Raw, real, unscripted. But that's exactly where the soul starts to show up. Jung said that individuation is only possible when the persona loses its grip. And that doesn't happen by force. It happens gradually, when you stop feeding the character and begin to sustain the self. It's unsettling, yes. You might feel like the ground is slipping away, like you no longer know who you are. But that's not confusion, it's a new beginning. You're finally disconnecting from the version you were trained to be, and making room to discover who you truly are. At this point, it's normal for sadness, anger, even fear to surface. Because the persona was there for so long, it felt like you. And when it starts to give way, old repressed emotions come up with it. But this isn't a setback. It's cleansing. It's the unconscious being released. Solitude, at this point, is no longer an external state. It becomes an internal tool, and it starts acting like a mirror, revealing, deconstructing, purifying. You're not losing yourself. You're finally shedding your layers, and what's left, once all the excess is gone, is the beginning of something authentic. Something that no longer needs an audience. Something that only blooms when you have the courage to stop running from yourself. Without the mask, what shows up first isn't lightness. It's density. It's like opening a room that's been locked for years and watching the dust rise. Silence is no longer just an empty space. It becomes a mirror. And this mirror reflects everything you've avoided feeling your whole life. In Jungian psychology, that repressed content is called the shadow. Everything you didn't want to see in yourself. Your pain, fears, impulses, traumas, shame. Not because you're weak, but because you didn't have the space or support to face it before. The shadow is all that was excluded, denied, or judged as unacceptable. And when you sustain your retreat, it finally finds a way through. Suddenly, old memories return. Emotions you thought were long gone resurface with intensity. A sadness with no name, an anger with no target, a fear that feels endless. Silence starts to scream. And this is where many people give up. They run back to distractions, to shallow relationships, to the comfort of autopilot. Because the shadow hurts, and facing it is hard work. It takes presence, humility, patience. There's no glamour, no applause, but there is truth. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's what's happening here. You're not regressing, you're clearing. And the pain of this process isn't punishment, it's release. Yes, you'll want to give up. You'll wonder if it's worth continuing. But it's important to understand. This stage isn't the end. It's the middle. It's the turning point. It's the darkest hour before the dawn. The part of the journey where everything in you begs to go back. But your soul has already started moving forward, and it doesn't want to repeat anymore. This is where many get lost, but also where some are reborn. Because those who hold space for this confrontation pass through a portal. Those who accept the shadow discover that behind it, there was strength, there was awareness, there was power. You're not being destroyed, you're being deprogrammed. And what's emerging, chaotic as it may seem, is the raw material of your transformation. The only question is, will you abandon yourself again? Or will you move forward, even with fear? But not everyone arrived at solitude by choice. Some were pushed into it, hurt, ignored, left behind. And that changes everything. Being alone by choice is a path of strength. But being alone by exclusion is, first of all, a place of pain. It's different to wake up and say, I choose to be with myself, than to wake up and realize no one stayed, no one listened, no one came back. Many people carry this loneliness disguised as independence. They learned to handle things on their own because they were disappointed too many times. They built walls, not because they love silence, but because closeness hurts. And that kind of distance doesn't free you. It hardens you. Carl Jung warned that a soul too isolated begins to collapse in on itself. When isolation becomes a survival strategy, life energy stops flowing. A person starts living in defense mode, and what looks like self-sufficiency is often just a deep fear of trying again. The line between solitude and isolation is thin, but it makes all the difference. In solitude, you find yourself. In isolation, you protect yourself. One heals, the other hides. That's why it's so important to ask an honest question. Did I choose to be alone, or did I just get used to the absence? Am I at peace, or just numb? That reflection can be uncomfortable, but it's the beginning of the shift. Because only by recognizing that pain do you start to break the automatic cycle. Pain that's ignored repeats itself. Unfelt pain turns into a pattern. And often, the I don't need anyone hides a no one chose me. You're not broken. You just had to protect yourself. But maybe now it's time for something new. Time to let silence be a choice again, not a punishment. Time to release the weight of abandonment and walk toward yourself with presence, not with armor. True solitude heals. Forced solitude makes you sick. Recognizing that difference is an act of self-care, and maybe the first real step toward living in peace with who you are. When the soul begins to feel safe, the body responds. Because the body also learned to live on high alert, to brace against rejection, criticism, abandonment, to tense up just to survive the fear of not being accepted, of being forgotten, of being hurt again. For a long time, maybe you didn't even realize how much you were living in survival mode, always expecting the worst, always trying to protect yourself from something invisible, always with your breath held, shoulders tense, chest tight. But as you hold space for solitude, not as punishment, but as a space for reconnection, your nervous system begins to register a new message. You are safe. Carl Jung used to say the unconscious isn't just a dimension of the mind, it's imprinted in the body. Every unprocessed emotion turns into tension. Every unresolved story manifests as physical blockages, as unexplained discomfort, as chronic exhaustion. That's why true transformation doesn't happen only in the mind. It must be felt, metabolized, embodied. And that's exactly what begins to happen here. You start to breathe more deeply, sleep more peacefully, feel less need to explain, defend, or anticipate. The body begins to sync with the present. And the present, for the first time, doesn't feel like a threat. This shift isn't sudden. It's subtle, but deeply liberating. It's when you realize you no longer have to be on constant alert, that you can exist without needing to prove yourself, that you can feel without the fear of being overwhelmed by your emotions. This state isn't disconnection, it's coherence. It's when your mind, body, and soul begin to operate on the same frequency, a frequency that doesn't require effort to exist, that doesn't depend on validation to feel worthy, that doesn't wait for approval to breathe in peace. Solitude stops being a struggle. It becomes a familiar space, an internal place of stability. And that place doesn't exclude the world. It just no longer depends on it. You begin to notice there is strength in softness, that there is protection in presence, and that being alone doesn't mean being vulnerable. It means being whole. And when the body feels that, it releases. It lowers its guard. And for the first time in a long while, you can simply be. No tension, no rush, no fear. With the body calmer and the nervous system at rest, something begins to emerge in a quiet yet very real way. A silent perception, subtle, that doesn't shout or impose itself. It's like a whisper from within. A certainty you can't explain, but you feel. That's intuition. Intuition doesn't compete with the world. It doesn't need to overcome the noise. It simply waits for you to make space, for you to stop chasing answers, explanations, external guarantees, and start trusting the wisdom that's already there, dormant but alive. Carl Jung considered intuition one of the 4 fundamental functions of the psyche. For him, it was the ability to perceive deep patterns, subtle truths, without going through logical reasoning. An intelligence that comes from the soul, not the mind, and that only fully manifests when there's enough inner silence to hear it. In this state of presence with yourself, You begin to feel what's right before you know why. You start sensing paths before you see signs. And that's not magic, it's internal coherence. It's your psyche functioning in harmony, without noise, without conflict. You start to notice small things, a discomfort you used to ignore, a sense that something no longer fits with who you're becoming, a subtle pull to change direction. And slowly, you begin to trust that feeling more, to follow less of what the world expects, and more of what your soul signals. This inner perception doesn't need proof. It doesn't need to justify itself. Because when you're connected to yourself, doubt loses power, and what arises in its place is something rare: effortless confidence. It's not arrogance, it's knowing. A knowing that doesn't come from the ego, but from the self, the deepest and most honest part of your being, the part that always knew, but never had space to speak. This is the true gift of conscious solitude. It doesn't just silence the external world, it reveals an entirely new inner one, a world where answers aren't chased, they're recognized, and where presence, finally, becomes direction. With intuition awakened, something deep begins to align within you. You no longer search for direction in the world, because now, it comes from within. And along with this presence, an image begins to take shape, your future self. This isn't about idealizing a perfect version of yourself, or pressuring yourself to become someone new. It's subtler than that. It's as if, little by little, you begin to feel the frequency of the person you're becoming. And instead of chasing them, you start walking with them. In Jungian psychology, the self is that guiding wholeness, the complete image of your soul in a state of coherence. That future self is a symbolic expression of that journey. Not a character to reach, but an inner direction, a living compass. You begin to realize that what you've been looking for outside isn't something missing. It's something already vibrating inside you, asking for space. And when you begin to live more aligned with that, decisions become easier, boundaries become clearer, relationships take on new meaning. This future self doesn't demand effort. It invites listening. It doesn't judge what you haven't yet become. It honors every step you've taken. And the closer you get to that presence, the more natural it becomes to say no to what no longer fits, and yes to what resonates with truth. It's as if you begin to inhabit this new energetic space even before it fully materializes. You feel the peace before the achievement, the freedom before the external change. And that strengthens you, because now you have a place to act from, not just something to chase after. This movement is silent, but it changes everything. What used to be a goal becomes a frequency. What used to be a dream becomes a state. And you stop waiting for the world to change in order to live in peace. You live in peace, and the world begins to respond. This is the kind of presence that doesn't demand, doesn't beg, doesn't adapt. It leads, and because of that, it transforms. You're no longer running from the past, nor merely healing the present. You are finally becoming someone capable of holding what you once dreamed of. Up to this point, much of your journey has been about healing, about silencing the noise, facing the pain, holding the transformation. But something shifts when you start living in alignment with that future self. You're no longer trying to fit in. Now, you hold. You emanate. It's as if little by little your energy stops being a reaction and becomes a presence. You stop reacting. Stop adapting to your environment, to expectations, to the noise, and you begin to radiate a frequency that comes from within, a frequency that organizes everything around you. In analytical psychology, Jung spoke of the regulating center of the psyche, the self. When you align with it, your energy becomes coherent. You stop being ruled by lack, by the need for acceptance, by the fear of rejection. Your emotional field becomes more integrated, and the world senses it. People start treating you differently. Situations that used to repeat disappear. Draining dynamics dissolve, not because you became someone else, but because you stopped vibrating what sustained them. You no longer need to convince anyone or prove anything. Your presence speaks for you. It says, I listened to myself, I honored myself, and I won't abandon myself anymore to fit into what doesn't serve me. This state isn't about arrogance, it's about integrity. You don't impose, you stand your ground. You don't shut down, but you also don't shrink to please. And that stance is deeply magnetic, because where there was once seeking, now there is center. You start to notice you attract experiences that reflect your new internal state, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence of who you've become. the external world begins to mirror your inner world, and that changes everything. That's the beauty of conscious solitude. It doesn't just change you from the inside, it rearranges the field around you, and you realize in practice that you don't need to chase belonging. When you are whole, life comes to you. Now your presence doesn't beg, it radiates, and what it emits comes back. When your energy stabilizes, love changes meaning. It stops being a place where you dissolve and becomes a space where you share. Because now you're no longer craving someone to complete you. You're whole enough to love without losing yourself. Conscious solitude teaches that in practice. Because it shows you that you can exist fully even without a romantic bond. That peace doesn't depend on someone's presence. And that true love only blooms when you're no longer trying to be saved by it. Carl Jung said no healthy relationship can be born from dependency. For a true meeting between souls, each must first find its own center. Otherwise, what we call love becomes fusion, and fusion over time turns into a cage. You begin to clearly see the bonds you used to accept out of fear, the concessions you made just to not be left, the silences you swallowed to keep the peace. All of that now feels dissonant, because when you're whole, your heart no longer tolerates what wounds your essence. And that doesn't mean becoming cold, distant, or unreachable. On the contrary, it means loving with more presence, more truth, more awareness. Loving because you overflow, not because you lack. Loving by choice, not for salvation. In that state, you no longer need the other to recognize you in order to know who you are. You don't shapeshift to fit into shallow affections. You offer yourself fully, and for that reason, you only stay where wholeness is mirrored. This kind of love doesn't require control, doesn't beg for return. It flows, and when it finds reciprocity, it creates something rare. A connection where two people walk side by side, without one needing to shrink for the other to exist. That's what solitude prepares you for. A heart capable of holding love, without losing itself to it. And when, or if, that love arrives, it won't find halves waiting to be completed. It'll find someone who already knows how to be whole. Someone who chose to stay with themselves before choosing any other company. Now that you recognize the value of conscious solitude, a question may arise. How do I begin to sustain this state in daily life? The answer is simple, but powerful. Presence. And the best way to start is by creating a space where you can reconnect with the version of yourself that already lives in peace. This exercise is a practice of active imagination, a core concept in Carl Jung's psychology. Unlike simple positive visualization, active imagination is a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. It's a symbolic conversation with the deeper parts of your psyche, and that's why it can provoke real change in how you feel, choose, and live. The idea is to create an inner encounter with what Jung would call the self, your wholeness, your wisdom, your direction. For that, you'll dedicate a few minutes to silence. But not just any silence. A silence with intention. Here's how the exercise works. You sit in a quiet place, close your eyes, and breathe deeply until you notice your mind beginning to slow down. Then, mentally, you repeat the phrase, "I am here." This simple affirmation isn't an empty mantra. It's an anchor, a reminder that you've come back to yourself. Next, you imagine, freely without forcing, a version of yourself that already lives in peace. This image might be vivid or just a feeling. What matters is that it symbolizes your state of coherence, clarity, and alignment with what's true in you. Observe this version closely. How does it move? How does that version of you breathe? How do they handle life's challenges? What do they no longer carry? Then, ask two questions in your mind. The first, what did you let go of to get there? The second, what do I still need to see? And then, just listen. The answer might come as a phrase, an image, a memory, or even a silence full of meaning. Don't judge. Just receive. At the end, thank them internally and say, with intention, "I see you, and I walk toward you." This phrase seals the encounter. It's not about creating a fantasy. It's about making a commitment to the most conscious version of who you already are. This exercise might seem simple, but it works on a deep level. It trains your mind to access states of presence. It redirects your attention inward, and over time, it strengthens your bond with what is most whole in you. It's a symbolic step, yes, but every true new beginning starts with a symbolic gesture, a quiet movement that says, "I've come home." You're not empty. You're full of yourself, full of parts of you that had been forgotten, suppressed, silenced, in the name of relationships that didn't fully see you. Conscious solitude showed you that. It didn't isolate you. It brought you back to yourself. For a long time, you thought you needed someone else to feel complete. You thought the pain of being alone was a sign of failure. But now, maybe you can see. That pain was just the start of the journey. The call. The starting point. Carl Jung said the most important encounters are the ones we have with ourselves. And maybe this is the deepest one of all. The moment you stop running from yourself and start looking at yourself with presence. Not with judgment, but with genuine interest. What was born in this process wasn't coldness. It was strength. You didn't become hard. You became whole. And now, you carry a peace that no longer depends on anyone. A clarity that doesn't need approval. An energy that no longer bends to incoherent environments, because it has learned to radiate its own truth. You're not isolating from the world. You're choosing yourself. You're growing internal roots so that, if love does arrive, and it can, it finds fertile soil, not dry land waiting to be saved. This journey isn't about rejecting relationships. It's about preparing the space so they're no longer a hiding place, but a mirror, a reflection of your own state of wholeness. And now that you've made it this far, tell me, what changed in you during this journey? What did you discover about your solitude and about your own presence? If you stayed with me until the end, drop a comment below. My presence is enough. That phrase isn't just a sign you watched the video all the way through. It's a commitment to yourself. And if this content resonated with you, if it helped you see your solitude through a different lens, consider supporting the channel by clicking the thanks button below. That financial support, besides being a gesture of recognition, helps me keep creating videos with depth, research, and care. With your help, this channel can reach even further and touch even more people who need to hear exactly this. That being alone is often the most direct path back to yourself. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video.